Hey everyone, Mr. Msay here, back with another video on the Gran Turismo 7.0 Gold License Guides, where this time we'll be on the normal National A license. So just like in the last video, I'm going to show you what I did to get the gold times in all 10 license tests, and I'll still be on the controller for these tests. If you need a recap on all the settings and assists that I'm using for these license tests, I'll leave a link in the description down below to the playlist where you'll find the video that explains what assist I'm using, along with all the other license tests I've made guides for so far. All the footage was recorded and edited during Gran Turismo 7's version 1.50 update. Here are my in-game tags in case you want to see my replays in-game as I upload them to the Gran Turismo social website, but other than that, let's go ahead and get this started. For normal National A1, we're at Tsukuba in the Super BRZ. And for this test, we'll be going through the racing line, which is the fastest way around a turn or a track. So in a way, we'll also be finding out how much speed we can take and any adjustments that we need to make along the way to make sure that we can go to the final corner as quickly as possible. So let's go ahead and get this started. Alright, so as we get started with normal National A1, you can shift this car a bit later, so shortly after the shift bar on the bottom starts to blink, that is when you can shift up from 3rd to 4th gear. Now, we will need to get ready for the final corner, and the reference point I'll be using is the pit sign on the right. So before you pass it, that's when you start to turn in, lift off of throttle, and start to apply the brakes. But you're only going to use around 25% of your braking power for a short moment. And this is to make sure that you don't lose too much speed as you enter this corner. But because this is a pretty long turn, I'm going to make a couple adjustments along the way to make sure I can maintain as much speed as possible. So using a little bit of throttle, a little bit of braking, using at most 25% of my braking power. Now, we're not at the apex just yet. That's actually a bit later into this corner because, again, this is a pretty long corner. Even just letting the car coast for just a moment to let the car turn in a bit more. And right about here is where the apex is, so before the curb on the right ends. So at this point, start to ease on the throttle if you haven't done so yet, but don't be too aggressive on the throttle because you don't want to bring yourself too wide and get all 4 wheels on the green stuff. So let's go through this again, but this time I will not stop the video. Alright, so for normal National A2, we're at Dragon Truck Gardens, and we're in the Volkswagen Scirocco. So we're going through a hairpin. It's a pretty weird one because there's 2 apexes that we do need to hit. So let's go ahead and get this started. Alright, so with this car, you can rev it out a bit, but for now, just stay on 4th gear. Bring yourself towards the right side of the track because you're going to look for a reference point to start to brake. For this turn, it's going to be the 100 meter board, so you're going to brake right as you pass it. And in a moment, I'll show you where I start to brake. You want to brake in a straight line to make sure that you're able to slow down and get ready to turn in, which is before the 50 meter board. And as you start to ease off of the brakes and turn in, so doing a bit of trail braking, the car does start to get a bit sketchy. It starts to step out a bit, so you want to be careful about that and just be really careful when you're easing off of the brakes. So before the 50 meter board, I'm gonna start to turn in and ease off of the brakes, and as I approach the apex, I will go down to 3rd gear. And again, I'm trying to be really careful easing off of the brakes and shifting down to make sure that the car doesn't step out too much. So starting to turn in, slowly easing off the brakes, shift onto 3rd gear as I'm about to hit the apex, and the car does step out a bit, but this will actually help me out a bit in getting myself set up for the second half of the hairpin. So I'm going to bring myself towards the far side of the track. That way I can get myself set up for the second half of the hairpin. So just doing a little bit of throttle control, and that way I can let the car rotate a bit more, get the car pointing towards the start finish line, and then get back on full throttle power. So I'm still getting myself set up, trying to get the car pointing towards the start finish line. That way when I get back on the throttle, I know I'll be able to make it to the end without going off track. And as you exit this turn, don't forget to shift up to 4th gear. You can see I'm still within the track limits, able to get a faster exit. Alright, so for normal national A3, we're in the Abarth 500 at Monza. So we're going through 2 corners here, and our goal is to carry as much speed as we can without going off the track, because this car is a front-wheel drive. It is pretty understeery, so it's really easy to get yourself set up just wrong to the point where the car doesn't want to turn, and then you end up in the grass. So let's get this started. And quick note, you can rev the heck out of this car before shifting up. But for turn number 1, you're going to look for this path on the left, as you want to turn in before you pass it. With this turn, Lesmo 1, you want to lift off our throttle, so you're doing some throttle control. That way the car can turn in a bit more, and you'll be able to still carry a decent amount of speed. Now, when it comes to getting back on the throttle, especially with a front engine front-wheel drive like the Abarth 500, you need to time it right. If you get on the throttle too early, what's going to happen is that you're just going to get a bunch of wheel spin on the front wheels, and your car is not going to want to turn as much anymore, which means you're going to go wide and you're going to end up in the grass or in the gravel. If you time it too late, you're not carrying enough speed, and you're going to lose time that way as well. So you need to time it right, and with this, I'm using the path on the right as my cue to get back on the throttle. And with this, I'm able to make it through this first turn without too much of a fuss. Now for Lesmo 2, you're going to brake before the 50 meter board, and you're going to turn in just after the 50 meter board. So you're going to stay on 4th gear for this turn, and you want to use around 40% of your braking power, because, I mean, with a slow car like this, you don't need to slow down too much. You just need to slow down just enough to carry as much speed as you can through this corner. Now, as you brake for a brief moment, the weight of the car is going to shift forward, which will actually let you rotate a little bit more, because the back of the car is going to step out just a little bit, and that'll actually give you the rotation you need to quickly go through Lesmo 2. And as soon as you hit the apex, start to get back on the throttle, and again, stay on 4th gear. And just like that, able to carry a bit more speed through this corner, almost going a bit wide, and able to finish the test. Alright, so for normal national A4, we're at Tokyo Expressway Central Outer Loop with the Honda Civic Type R. So we're going through urban tracks where, yeah, you're going to want to be careful about touching the walls, because the walls are lava, and you have to carry as much speed as you can through a track like this, because Tokyo Expressway Central Outer Loop is a momentum track. So we're going to do just that and try to carry as much momentum as possible without touching the walls. So let's get this started. Alright, so with this car, you want to shift up just after the shift bar on the bottom of the screen starts to blink. So you don't want to rev it out too much with this car. Now before I go on, I do want to note that for tracks like Tokyo Expressway, especially the central layouts, there are these little signs that you can find around a track, which are great signs, get it, to tell you that this is the apex or this is your turning point. And I'll point some of them out whenever we do a license test on a Tokyo Expressway track, but this is especially the case for the central layouts, as these come in especially useful to know when you need to do a certain action. But anyways, for this right and left turn, you're taking it flat out, getting really close and comfortable with the walls. And your first braking point is actually going to be when the solid wall on the left ends. So I'll show you exactly where I start to brake in a moment. But in this scenario, we're just going to barely dab on the brakes because we just need to slow down just a little bit to carry just enough speed to make this turn. Now, I'm braking when the solid wall on the left ends, and you can see my turning point, that little yellow sign on the left, that's my turning point, and I'm going to turn in just before I pass it. And you can see I'm using around 5% of my braking power. So I'm just going to turn in, use a little bit of my braking power, get as close as I can to the wall on the right, and you can actually see one of the apex markers on the right. So that is my cue to slowly start to get back on the throttle, and I'm going to wait just a little bit longer until I reach the second apex marker on the right, as that is my cue to get back on full throttle power. And if I do it just right, I'll carry a lot of speed out of the turn but not hit the wall. Then for this next right turn, there's another turning marker on the left. I'm going to turn in just before I pass it, and I'm going to do my best to get as close as I can to the wall on the right and go through these turns flat out. And if you do it just right, you won't get too close to the walls on the left. And at this point, you want to try to bring yourself towards the middle of the track. That way you can easily go through this left turn flat out. But for this test, it's all about carrying momentum and getting close and comfortable with the walls. For National A5, we're at Spa in the Nissan 180SX, except things are a little wet. So for this one, we will need to be even more careful with our actions, especially our throttle input as we navigate through wet surfaces on Spa. Alright, so let's go ahead and get this started, where the first thing I want to talk about is the wetness meter that's on the bottom left hand corner of the screen. So when you're on a wet surface, you'll see that meter go up, and the wetter the surface is, the higher the bar will reach. And if you go towards the right side of the track, and you can actually see that it's a little shinier or a little more reflective on the right side of the track, that part's wetter, which means that the wetness meter will go up and there will be less grip available. So in this situation, you actually want to be where the racing line is. So in this case, the left side of the track for the time being, as this part's a little drier, which means there's more grip available. But the track is still wet, so you still need to be careful with your inputs. Now here we can stay on third gear for the time being, and because the track is wet, which means less grip, we will need to brake a little earlier. In this case, we're braking before the 50-meter board. So you're going to brake as much as you can in a straight line, and you're going to turn in before the curb on the left ends. So you see me braking in a straight line using my full braking power, and before the curb on the left ends, that's where you want to start to turn in and slowly ease off the brakes. And you will go down to second gear as you approach the apex of this first right turn. So again, just nice and easy off the brakes, going down to second gear and getting really close to the ballers on the right. And as you hit the apex, that's where you want to slowly ease on the throttle, and you need to be especially careful with your throttle input to make sure that you don't get any unnecessary wheel spin, which can cause the car to spin out. So you'll see me right here just being really careful with my throttle input, and here I do get a bit risky and dip a bit into the green area on the left, and you can actually see that wetness bar on the bottom left corner of the screen increase, which means that I'm hitting a pretty wet surface. So again, I need to be really careful here, as if I get a bit too careless, I'm gonna get some wheel spin and potentially lose control. So again, just being really careful with my throttle input, going towards the left side of the track, but because I don't have enough time to move all the way to the left, I'm just gonna start to turn in right around here, so before the curb on the left ends. And here I do brake just a very tiny bit. I don't think it's necessary to brake for this turn, but I just wanted to note that in this replay I did tap on the brakes just a very little bit. But what I do want to also make note of is that mid-turn I shift up to third gear. That way I don't have to do it as I'm going towards the start finish line. I can do it mid-turn, that way it'll save me a bit of time, because I'm already having to do a bit of throttle control going through the turn, so might as well shift up right there and save myself a little time as I go down the straight. And I'm going to wait until I fully straighten up my steering before I use all of my throttle input. And I am playing a bit risky here because I am on a wetter surface, so the curb is pretty wet. You can see the bottom left corner of the screen that the wetness bar is 100% full. And just a quick note, if the upper third of the wetness bar is any part full, then that's really wet, and if it's possible, you want to try to avoid going on those areas. Alright, so for normal National A6, we're going through something a bit more normal, and we're going through Ascari at Monza with the Alfa Romeo 4C. And this car is pretty nimble, so it'll be pretty interesting going through some fast flowing corners in a small car. So let's get this started. Alright, so as we get started with the license test, you can stay on 4th gear as we go down this back straight. Bring yourself towards the right, and you're going to look for your reference point, which is the 100 meter board. So right as you're passing it, that's when you start to brake, and you're going to use all of your braking power and brake in a straight line. So in a moment, you'll see exactly where I start to brake, and right here is the moment I start to use the brakes. So use all of your braking power, and you can actually stay on 4th gear for this entire license test, so you don't need to shift down to 3rd gear. So all of your braking power, brake in a straight line. You're going to use the 50 meter board as your turning point. So you're going to turn in just as you pass the 50 meter board, and as you start to turn in, you're going to start to ease off of the brake. So doing a little bit of trail braking. So you see right here, easing off of the brakes, hit the apex, gradually get back on the throttle, and as soon as you start to make this right turn, you actually want to hug the right side of the track and start to lift off a throttle to let the car turn in just a little bit more. And this is to set myself up for the exit of Ascari, and you can actually already see that I'm already on full throttle, and I'm going to remain at full throttle for the remainder of this license test. And right as the curb on the right ends, that is where you're turning towards the left, going through it flat out, and you'll take advantage of the curbs as they are still within track limits. So again, go through it flat out, trying to bring yourself back in towards the track, so you don't go off track, and finish the test. For normal National A7, we're at Catalunya with the BMW M3. And this is where you're going to see some parts where it is possible to cheese some things. And you want to be really careful with your throttle input because this car loves to step out at every single opportunity. So let's carefully get this started. Alright, so I hope you like cheese because we're about to cheese turn number 1. This specific situation lets us go all the way to the left and use the path on the left as our first braking point. So I'm still on the curves, which means I'm still in the track limits. I know, weird GT7 shenanigans. But anyways, brake as much as you can in a straight line because you're going to turn in before the curb on the left ends. So you see right here, before the curb on the left ends, that's where I start to turn in and slowly ease off of the brake. So doing a little bit of trail braking. Now, as you hit the apex, this is where you need to be especially careful with your throttle input because this BMW will step out at every single opportunity. So yeah, you have to be really mindful with your throttle input as you go through this license test. So doing a little bit of lifting off our throttle as we go through the first chicane, and we want to set ourselves up for the next turn just up ahead. So what we're going to do, use a little bit of throttle control and bring yourselves not all the way to the right, but just a bit towards the right, because just as the curb on the right starts, that's where we turn in towards the right and lift off our throttle. So doing even more throttle control, you can see me just using just a little bit of throttle input to try to maintain my speed. Now, when your car is pointing towards the orange barrier on the other side of the track, that's where you want to start to gradually ease on more and more throttle power, but you still want to be careful because the car can still step out. So yeah, you want to be really patient getting back on full throttle power. For normal National A8, we're in the Toyota Tundra and we're at Colorado Springs. So we are going off-roading, and we do need to go through this in a particular way to try to squeeze out as much time as possible. So our goal is to try to drive as smoothly as possible to maintain as much speed. So let's get this started. Alright, so quick note, I am on roof cam because this car is gigantic and you can't take this entire test flat out. Alright, so bring yourself towards the right because the grass is still within the track limit, so you can go on the grass. So you want to bring yourself as close as you can to the wall on the right because you need to get ready for the left turn that is coming up. And you want to be mindful about how much steering input you're using so that you don't screw off too much speed. So you can see that I'm not turning in too much, just enough to bring myself towards the right while trying not to lose too much speed. Now I'm going to stay towards the right, and I'm going to use this track marshal on the right as my cue to turn in. And I'm actually turning in before I even pass the track marshal. And here I will turn in a bit more because I want to get the car to do just a little bit of sliding, get the car towards the left side of the track and get it set up for the next right turn. So going to get the car as close as possible to the wall on the left without actually touching it. And again, still remaining on full throttle power. Now, if you set it up just right, you can bring the car towards the middle of the track and then aim towards the signs that are on the right. You don't want to aim right at them, just aim near them because there's an invisible barrier. So turning in gently so that you don't scrub off too much speed and so that you don't initiate any unnecessary sliding. Again, just trying to aim in the general direction of those signs and maintain your speed. For normal National A9, we're going through the hairpin at Suzuka and the Honda NS6 Type R. And unlike the hairpin that we went through on Dragon Trail Gardens for National A2, this one's pretty sharp. So I'll show you what I did to tackle this hairpin. Alright, so as we get ready to approach the hairpin, you're going to stay on third gear even if you hit the rev limiter. And you're going to take this right kink flat out and bring yourself towards the right side of the track. Your turning point is before you reach this pole that is on the right. So you go through this right turn flat out and stay towards the right. The reference point that I'm using to hit the brakes is when the curb on the right ends. But at the same time, just before you hit the brakes, you want to try to get the car straightened up for the entry to the hairpin. So just as you clear this turn, start to straighten up your steering, and as you reach the end of the curb that is on the right, that is when you start to hit the brakes, because you're going to be at full braking power. And you want to try to brake in a straight line so the car doesn't step out as you start to apply the brakes. Now you're going to go down to second gear, still at full braking power up to this point, and before the curb on the left starts, that's where you want to start to turn in. And as you start to turn in, start to gradually ease off of the brake. So doing a little bit of trail braking. And you can see the apex where that little yellow pin is. That's where I'm going to start to gradually get back on the throttle. And there is a moment as I'm approaching the apex where I'm coasting it for just a moment. So no braking, no throttle input to let the car turn in just a little bit more. And right as I hit the apex right here, that's where I start to gradually get back on the throttle. And do note, I do not go down to first gear. So start to gradually get back on the throttle, and you're going to want to get the car pointing towards the middle of the grandstands on the other side of the track. That is your cue to use all of your throttle power and make use of the entire width of the track to get a fast, clean exit. And as you get closer towards the right side of the track, you want to start to straighten up your steering, making sure that you're pointing towards the start-finish line. For the final normal National A test, we're at our topless and we're using the Toyota Supra. So we're going through part of sector 1 out of topless, and these are some pretty tricky turns, at least with this car, because the car does like to slide around a bit, and you do have to be careful about how you exit some of the corners, especially the hairpin, to make sure that your car stays under control and get you closer or even reach the goal time. So let's get this started. Alright, so if you're using the manual transmission, you need to shift up the moment you gain control of your car, because you will hit the rev limiter if you wait even around half a second. So you do have to be quick on your toes about that. Now your first braking point is when you reach the path that is on the left. So just as you pass it, that's where you want to use all of your braking power and brake in a straight line. Now you're going to turn in before the curb on the left starts, but you have to be careful with this turn because this car loves to step out around here. At least for me, when I was recording this, the car always liked to step out on this particular corner. So here you can see I'm already getting ready to start to turn in, and that's where I'm going to start to gradually ease off of the brakes and take my time going down to third gear. So I'm going to shift down right around here, easing off the brakes, just taking my time. And you can actually see with my Ghost's car that they're stepping out, my car is stepping out as well. So yeah, with this corner you have to be really careful with your actions to try to make sure that the car doesn't step out too much. But I'm hitting the apex, so I'm going to carefully ease on the throttle to make sure that the car doesn't step out any more than it should. Then go towards the middle of the track, because before the curb on the right is about to end, that's where you want to ease off the throttle and start to turn in. And you want to try to be careful with these turns because it's really easy to carry too much speed and end up going wide, which will cost you time. So again, just being really careful with your throttle inputs so you can hit these two apexes. Then bring yourself towards the middle, and you're going to start to brake before the curb on the right ends. So you're going to use all of your braking power and go down to second gear. Now you're going to just bring yourself towards the right side of the track. So you're not going to go towards the left then towards the right. Yeah, you're not going to do that. You can see I'm just bringing myself towards the hairpin using all of my braking power, and when the curb on the left is about to end, that's where you want to start to turn in. So you're going to hug the right side of the track, and as you start to turn in, that's where you start to ease off the brakes. That way you're doing a little bit of trail braking. You can see right there, easing off of the brakes. Let the car coast for just a moment so it can turn in a bit more. And as you hit the apex, you want to be really careful getting back on the throttle. And this car will step out if you're not careful getting back on the throttle. If you're too aggressive on the throttle, the car's going to step out. So you want to be careful getting back on the throttle. Use the entire width of the track to straighten up your car as you're exiting the hairpin. That way you can maintain control of your car, and then gradually bring yourself towards the right side of the track. So I'm bringing myself towards the end of the curb on the left as my turnout point. And again, being careful with your throttle input, then bring yourself towards the right and finish the test. And that is it for the normal National A license test guides. Hopefully this guide helped you out in getting closer or even reaching the gold time range. So now comes the normal International B license, which I'm not sure how long it's going to take. I guess it'll depend on how difficult those tests are. So I'll get it out as soon as I can, because yeah, I don't know how long that'll take. But we'll go ahead and end the video. So thank you for watching. If you like this video, you can press the like, subscribe, and all the good stuff. So this is Mr. MCA, the world's most okay player, and I'll see you in the next video.